What's up, everybody? It's Saturday,
Hmm.
and we told you we're not doing these on Friday night. Now we get to open up the door for a lot of opportunities for this show.
Speaking of opening,
Yeah.
you just
So
opened that pie.
we're actually doing this earlier in the week, and we talked about it last Saturday. We dove into the West Virginia mine wars. A lot of people would call it the Forgotten War. We're just kind of getting into it. Went through the rough
war.
Yeah. We kind of went through the Cliff Notes version of it last week, and then I was like, we got this new format, and we had this guy on before years ago, and I was like, what a better way to kick off the new era of these pre-recorded episodes than bring in someone that's got an absolutely massive amount of knowledge on this exact subject. So good that he wrote a book about it.
What?
Yep. We're bringing authors on here. We've started to step the IQ level up of this show outside to replace myself. You guys are good on the IQ front.
Does the book have pictures? Because that's what I'm gonna need. Because I struggle a little bit with words.
There is I believe there is a picture section in this book of some. They're all black and white though. I gotta be.
I'm good with black and white photos. That's fine.
All right. Well, let's get him in here again. Old friend of show, but a friend of show, out of Southern West Virginia, an assistant professor at Southern Community College, University of Charleston, and also West Virginia Wesleyan, and the author of The Road to Blair Mountain, Saving a Mine Wars Battlefield from King Coal, Charles B. Keeney III. What's up, dude?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Give me an excuse to wear all my West Virginia garb today, man.
Here we go.
He's so happy. He's so happy.
I am happy. It's tough, man. I was raised in the Ohio State country, so I like my Buckeyes, but man, I lived in West Virginia for 9 years, and that's all it takes to fall in love with the Mountaineers. So it's tough. Like, I like my Buckeyes, but God, do I like my Mountaineers too. So it's tough.
Yeah, it's a rocky relationship to love the Mountaineers too. This day and age,
he's a Browns fan.
So be a Browns fan. I'll say, yeah. Hey.
Oh, okay. So you're a man of long suffering.
Set the edge, spot the ball. Let's go.
Yeah.
Honestly, after Richrod got hired, I started buying all the stuff again. I got excited. So we got you on here. We talked about last week. You weren't here last week. So basically what we talked about was like my rough knowledge. We kind of just somehow, some way ended up on this topic. And we went over like the Battle of Mate 1. I had to throw out the conspiracy of Sid might have shot Mayor Testerman. And then we went over how the Socialist Party's involved a little bit with donating a bunch of firearms and money. And then we talked about
lots of firearms.
Cabin Creek, Paint Creek, them like having like the train that would shoot down on so kind of like the highlights, but not really a deep concentrated dive. So in your book though, real quick to everybody watching, do a real quick pitch of what The Road to Blair Mountain, Saving a Mine Wars from the Battlefield from King Coal is all about. Because I know you go a couple different angles outside of just the historical part of it itself of the battle.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a complicated story, but The Road to Blair Mountain itself, the book, is about our efforts to preserve the battlefield where the miners fought with the coal companies and with the federal troops in August and the first couple of days of September 1921. This 5-day pitched battle, which took place on about a 12-mile front. Which, to give you some perspective on that, the World War I Battle of Verdun started on an 8-mile front. So the scale of it was pretty large. Then for a domestic uprising, that's a pretty big giant thing here. But it was put on the National Register of Historic Places, but then to protect it, but then the industry, coal industry, using some fraud and some other tactics, got it taken off the National Register. That's when I got involved. I wasn't any kind of an activist or anything like that, but it's when it happened, I was like, "What's going on here? what's happening. And they were going to blast the battlefield. And then that led to me eventually becoming president of a group called Friends of Blair Mountain. And what we ended up doing is we went through like an 8-year struggle to get this site preserved. And we also founded a museum called the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum. That's down in Matewan. And by the way, Damon, you were asking about pictures. I heard there in the intro.
Yeah.
If you can go onto our website, wvminewars.org, and we have online exhibits that show you things like the kind of script that the coal miners were paid with. Like they weren't paid in American money, they were paid in coal company money. And you can see like examples of that, types of hats they used to wear, the type of lighting they used to have, and some of our other stuff. We have an original bandana from 1921, red bandana that the miners wore, of course, were referred to as rednecks. So the book is about that, about us preserving the battlefield. It's also about the history, and I have a personal connection to the history. The president of the Union in West Virginia was my great-grandfather. And he was the leader of the miners in all this. He was the guy 4 weeks before the battle started. They had this big rally outside of the Capitol in Charleston. And it was my great-grandfather that told the crowd the only way you can get your rights is with a high-powered rifle, and told the men to go home and await the call to march. And he was later charged with treason after the battle.
Oh, that's not
and
right.
He was all the treason trials took place in the same courthouse where John Brown was tried in Charlestown. If you're familiar with the story of John Brown and the Civil War, the raid, Harper's Ferry, and all that stuff that happened in 1859. So 2 huge treason trials in American history took place in Charlestown, West Virginia. Not Charleston, but Charlestown, which is over actually by the Shenandoah River, about an hour outside of D.C. It's actually pretty close to D.C. there. But the book is about our efforts to preserve it and our effort to reintroduce the history, because it was taken out of like all the history textbooks. It's not in any of the textbooks. And I went and found the paper trail to how they took it out of the textbooks, and they didn't even talk about it in the state. And so us having the museum is a way of kind of taking control of our own history and telling the story. And it's been really great. We've had coal miners and their families come in, and we've had people from all over the country come in. Probably about 3,000 people or so visit the museum every summer. So it's been a really great experience. And we've got a series of monuments that we're putting up. There you go. That's the Matewan National Bank building that we kind of took over, and where our museum is now. We've got an archive set up there. We do musical events.
Nice.
I did a project with Chris Cooper, who's the Academy Award-winning actor who was in the movie Matewan, but he's also in a bunch of other movies like Seabiscuit and October Sky and The Bourne Identity. He played the bad guy in The Bourne Identity.
Matewan had low key an amazing cast. Like James Earl Jones was in that thing. Like I forget there was a couple other big names too, but that was the leader.
The guy that played the warden in Shawshank Redemption. If you remember Shawshank.
Oh yeah.
Required viewing for all Americans.
that is definitely improved. Huh?
I hated my students. My students have no knowledge of good American movies.
Oh my God.
And so they don't get any movie references. I'll mention something like Shawshank Redemption or Godfather or something like that, and they have no idea what I'm talking about.
That's a crime.
Like say hello to my little friend. They're just like, what? Like,
they don't know.
Yeah.
They don't have any idea. But do you guys want to talk a little bit about the history of the mine wars itself?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess
we started talking about it because we brought up like the whole company thing and how you get paid in company dollars, and you were a slave basically to that civilization, that little town, and which led to Tony dumping fat, highlight points. So
okay,
how did it get to the point where it was justified to pay someone a company script? Like, because it didn't come into West Virginia until post Civil War. So from like 1880 to like 1920, somehow it got to the point where you couldn't even work for actual money. Like, how did it get to that point that quick?
Okay, it's a good question. Okay, so let's go back to like 18.
Great question.
Good question. Let's go back to like 1882. That was the same year my great grandfather was born. His name was Frank Keeney, by the way.
And he worked with Mother Harris. We talked about her.
Mary Harris Jones, Mother Jones.
Mother Jones.
Yeah, the most dangerous woman in America. That's what they called her. We'll get to Mother Jones in a minute. So 1882. This was a red letter year. It wasn't just the year that Frank Keeney was born, but something big happened that year that began to change the course, not just of West Virginia history, but world history. And we all know who Thomas Edison is, right? That's the guy who invented the light bulb. But he invented something else in 1882. The coal-fired power plant. And the first ever coal-fired power plant debuted in New York City and Manhattan in 1882. And of course, this new invention, the light bulb, was around, but you had to figure out a way to get the power to the light bulbs, right? And to power entire cities. And it's Edison that came up with the modern electric grid that cities still use, and came up with a coal-fired power plant. So now
he took credit for it. I mean,
yeah. So now you've got coal that had just been used, for trains, and it was being used for steel production, metallurgical coal. There's two types of coal: metallurgic coal and thermal coal. Metallurgic coal is for the production of steel, and thermal coal is for the production of electricity. We have a lot of both in West Virginia, a whole lot of both. Anyway, with this, now a coal is going to be used to generate electricity. And of course, it generates over 50% of the electricity that's used in the United States for the next 100 plus years. At times, it was like about 75% of the electricity in America was generated by coal. So it's a tremendous amount. And it was, of course, used to make all the steel, put all the skyscrapers up and built the American cities. So now there's this giant need for coal. And in West Virginia, they find that there's tons and tons of coal. Of course, West Virginia is the only place. You got eastern Kentucky. They were already mining in western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. If you go like right outside of Pittsburgh in places like Uniontown, you find that the culture is really similar to the coal fields in West Virginia. The accents are different, but the culture is really actually similar. I've taught classes up there for Penn State. And the people are very similar to the way they are in Logan County, just different accents. Although if you tell them that, they all would.
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you this.
How dare you?
I would rather live in southern West Virginia because they got them houses stacked on each other, like in the pits. Like, it's amazing how many houses they put on the side of a mountain. Like, it's crazy. Like, it does not look comfortable at all. But anyway, So
they go in and they start buying up land. But of course, a lot of the locals that have lived in these mountains, most of them that lived in these mountains came in right around the time of the American Revolution or a little bit before. My family came in 1751, before the French and Indian War even started. So a lot of those families have been around for about 100 years and they're living in these places. They don't want to sell off their land. So the companies come up with a new term that enables them to get to the land, and that is mineral rights. Right? You well know the term mineral rights today, but it didn't exist back then. So they got mineral rights, which enable them to buy what's underneath people's feet.
Yep.
And then ultimately, through a lot of different methods, some legit and some illegit, they managed to get most of the land that's in southern West Virginia. And the coal companies still, or land companies, I should say, still own about 70% of the land in West Virginia.
Unbelievable, man.
So they own a ton of land, and they still do. And there's big natural gas reserves here too. So that's going to be, mined out after the coal, which a lot of the coal in southern West Virginia is mined out. But anyway, they get all this land. And then, of course, you have to import a workforce once you start up a mine because there aren't enough locals to make up your workforce. So you start importing in people like immigrants and blacks from the South. And there's no regulations on businesses at this time. There's no such thing as a 40-hour work week or a weekend or paid leave. You know, if you're working in a steel mill, I just mentioned, you know, the steel industry, you get your arm chopped off in the steel mill, you get fired. You lose your job. You know, that's just the way it is, because there's 50 and there's tons of people waiting for your job right around the corner, because immigrants are coming into the country hand over fist through Ellis Island right now, coming in from places like Italy and Eastern Europe. You've all seen The Godfather Part 2, you know, when little Vito comes, you know, into the islands. It was like that, right? All these different groups coming in, and so they come in working the mines. So there's no regulations on these companies. And they're able to really buy off a lot of local politicians and kind of get away with whatever they want to get away with. And they, you know, have their own towns. And so those towns are not incorporated. They don't have sheriffs. They have their own security forces that they call mine guards. And it was the mine guards that really, really got the miners going. You know, the company money was one thing that they get paid in. And by the way, if you go on our website, you'll find a piece of script that just says "good for one loaf of bread." And imagine getting that on payday. You know,
thanks, boss. Merry Christmas.
Yeah, good for one loaf. And so they're not just dictating where you can shop, you know, by giving you this stuff. Yeah, there it is. Good for one loaf of bread.
Unreal, man. Unreal.
And so you get to see that when they're going on strike, you know, unions can get a lot of criticism today, and some of that's really justified for like demanding outlandish things, you know, and certain things like that. But back then, you go back 100 years ago, they're fighting basic rights, such as they want to be. When they go on strike in 1912 and the mine wars really get started up, one of their demands was just to be paid in American money.
Right.
That's one of their
crazy idea.
Yeah, how dare they? Shame.
Yeah. So ultimately, you know, they turn to unions and unionism to try to kind of claw their way out of this system. They really hated the mine guards. I really want to emphasize that, because it was kind of a private police, kind of a KGB, Gestapo kind of thing they had going on. They got their mine guards from a company called the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency. And this was a group of guys that they were out of Bluefield, West Virginia, but they were guys that had no compunction about cracking skulls. A lot of guys had criminal records. Some of them were ex-military, but they're guys that you know are used to using violence and using force. And they had operatives. They had guys from the detective agency, mine guards, that would act as coal miners, and so they would spy on the workforce and see what they were up to. They would crawl underneath homes. They would build homes up on blocks because you'd have a lot of floods. They'd crawl underneath homes and listen and like make reports. And that's not like hearsay. I know that for a fact because I've looked through their archives, the Baldwin Felts archives, and you can see all the reports from all the company spies. So, I mean, I've read them. They'd open up people's mail.
I was thinking they were the Pinkerton Agency. They're the ones out of New York, right? That's
and the Pinkertons were often hired out by the railroads. The Pinkertons are more famous for hunting down like railroad bank robbers. And things like that. I think in the movie 3:10 to Yuma.
I was gonna say
with Russell Crowe. I think the Pinkertons are after him. At that point, Bonnie and is it Bonnie and Clyde? I think Bonnie and Clyde is one of those movies. Not Bonnie and Clyde. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. If you remember that old movie, the Pinkertons.
I think you were involved a lot with the Wells Fargo stuff too. Yeah.
Yep.
That's my bad. I was thinking the Baldwin Felts were out of New York. I did not know they were out of Bluefield. That's fascinating. I remember it.
Yeah. Pinkertons do get involved in some strikes later on, like in Homestead in Pennsylvania. Once you get into like the 1890s and stuff like that. But in West Virginia, it was the Baldwin Felts. Unless you were in Logan County. In Logan County, they just had deputies that the coal companies paid for. You had a guy by the name of Don Chafin that kind of ran the county like a mob boss. Right. And he, I've got lots of good Don Chafin stories, but he had 300 deputies for Logan County.
And
not that many people in Logan County.
Yeah. I think they
have
like
20% of the town.
Yeah. I think they have 4 today for like the whole county.
Right.
So a bit of a shift. And Chafin was an interesting guy. He kind of ruled the whole county. That's where the Battle of Blair Mountain took place. And he was the sheriff, but he was also paid on the side by the coal companies. And then they paid him about $120,000 a year in early 1920s money to keep the miners under control. He also ran a speakeasy.
A lot of money, folks.
Yeah. And he ran a speakeasy in Logan. During Prohibition, right?
I thought I'd say, wasn't that illegal, Charles? Like, that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, see, here's a cool little mountain story from all that. So, Chafin ran the speakeasy, and he shut down all the moonshine stills in the county.
Oh,
so the only place you could get whiskey was through him, right? But in doing so, he shut down the whiskey mills of the Hatfields.
Oh, bad move.
If you know the Hatfields, and I am talking about the Hatfields, the Hatfield-McCoy feud. Devilance Hatfield, who was the patriarch during the Hatfield-McCoy feud, he was still alive at this time, and his family had moved to Logan County. Oof. And Chafin shut down all their whiskey mills, and they did not take well to that. So they started helping the union. And they started helping the coal miners, and the Hatfields would sneak my great grandfather into the county by horseback at night.
So sick.
And he would stay with the Hatfields, and then they would sneak him into the coal camps. And they also, Devilance would send some of his grandsons, because he was old at this time and his sons were all adults. He would send his grandsons, who were like 19, 20, to Frank Keeney's house in Charleston, and they would guard his house while he was away because he got so many death threats.
Unions were big deals back then. Know that. They were wrapped up in all that stuff all the time.
Yeah, and the Hatfields scouted out all the defensive positions that the coal companies were using at Blair Mountain and did reconnaissance for them.
Cool.
So
I didn't know this.
Lots of cool little stories like that.
That's wild.
So there was a lot going on, a lot of intrigue and a lot of corruption, and the coal miners were kind of fighting up against that. And I think the real tipping point when it comes to Blair Mountain, the real tipping point was when Sid Hatfield and Ed Chambers get murdered. Yeah. And I don't know if they went over that last week.
I told them that
we just got to that. That was where we went
unarmed, and that you could still see the bullet holes in the courthouse steps to this day.
Yeah.
For some reason they went unmanned, but isn't there a conspiracy as to why they were unmanned and was an inside, someone allegedly rolled
unarmed? You mean?
Okay.
They didn't have any security with them either. They went unarmed and with no guards when they were ordered to do so, I believe.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
So let's get into Blair Mountain then. What went down?
Well, I want to hang on real quick.
This part. Yeah. Sorry. This part which led up to.
Okay. There was a trial before this. You had the Battle of Matewan, right? Or the Matewan Massacre, right? There was a trial after that, in which Sid Hatfield and a number of the other individuals involved were tried, and they were all acquitted. And that was in nearby Williamson. And there were several instances where there was almost huge gunfights that took place in the town because you had 50 or 60 Baldwin Felts guards and then 50 or 60 coal miners, and they were all armed to the teeth, just kind of staring at one another across the street. And so then Hatfield gets charged with another incident, him and Ed Chambers. that was kind of trumped up charges. But anyway, in McDowell County, because some of the violence had spilled over to neighboring McDowell County, and they had to go under an agreement that they would show up unarmed. And so they agreed to show up unarmed without their weapons. And of course, that's when they got gunned down outside the courthouse.
Yeah.
And there was no murder charges ever brought up on Sid and Ed Chambers, correct?
There were murder charges brought up on them before regarding the Matewan massacre, but they were acquitted of those.
No, for whoever shot and killed.
Oh
yeah.
Nobody got arrested.
Yeah,
nobody got arrested, and half the
I guess
town
that's
saw
the part that blows me away is these Baldwin Felts could literally just kill people, and it was like, yeah, you're allowed.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
they
what are you
weren't
gonna
army, they weren't deputized, they were just literally hired killers, and it was totally okay.
Yeah.
Like,
But
that
dude,
part-
look at the mindset. Like you're in a town where the coal miners and everybody
Yeah.
that's making money is fighting against the
well,
company, and everybody's not
and
wealthy
The
back then.
the crazy
you know,
part is
so-
this is only 100 years ago.
No, I
when-
know. I
Within
know.
100 years ago, we could have to go around and kill people if you were a Baldwin Felt and be like, yeah, he's a Felt. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. I'm sorry. Sorry for the misunderstanding.
No.
Go about your
That's
business.
cool. So,
Yeah.
after this, okay, that takes place on August the 1st when he's killed. Something else that took place right at the same time that was taking place. The big strike was taking place way down in Mingo County, all right, which is on the West Virginia-Kentucky border. And there were thousands of miners, I don't know, some 7,000-ish miners and their families living in tent colonies, right? The mine guards come in along with state police, and they raid the tent colony. They declare martial law because there was something that took place in May called the 3-day Battle of the Tug. I don't know if you even talked about that. That was a 3-day long shootout in which around 30 people were killed that we know of. That's a whole nother thing. But anyway, that happened. Martial law gets declared, and then the state troopers come in and they arrest all the miners, or a big bunch of them, in the tent colonies, and just hold them in prison with just military tribunal charges. And then they shut all the food supplies down. Like the United Mine Workers was sending food to the families, and they shut the food supplies down, wouldn't let any food get through. And then they poured gasoline and stuff in all the wells where they were getting their water out of. So the families, yeah, it's kind of intense.
It's pretty rough.
So the families down there are starving.
Yeah.
Right? And all the miners have now all the men have been arrested. The women and children are now living in these little tent camps, and they don't have any food. They don't have any fresh water. Then Sid Hatfield gets murdered, who was kind of like the only lawman who was on their side, right?
Right.
Finally, a sheriff, or he wasn't a sheriff, he was chief of police, but finally a guy on the law stood up for the miners, and he gets gunned down. Well, it's the following week where they had that big rally that I told you that my great grandfather said, the only way you can get your rights is with a high powered rifle. They go to the governor's office, and the governor refused to even meet with him. And so then they make the call out to march, and 2 weeks later, they began assembling. They spend a couple of weeks getting their stuff together, and they start assembling at Marmet, which is just outside of the capital city of Charleston. And they're going south to get to Mingo County to get to these women and children. Okay, that's what their goal is. They know that the women and children down there are starving. They don't have any water. All the men have been locked up with what they think are unconstitutional charges. And so that's where they're headed, okay, to Mingo County. But to get to Mingo County, they got to go through Logan County, and that's Don Chafin. And a few miles north of the town of Logan, you have this, the way the topography is, you have this series of ridges, these mountain ridges that kind of stretch almost like a wall. North of Matewan, and it starts at Blair Mountain and then stretches along a place called Spruce Fork Ridge. It's almost like a natural fortress. And so this is where Chafin set up all of his defensive positions from Blair Mountain and along this huge ridge line. And so they set up all these, machine gun entrenchments. They had Tommy guns, 30-06s, lots of 30-06 shells we've gotten. And so they set up this huge defensive system. So this is where the battle is going to take place. And it's not so much that they're trying to like seize Blair Mountain. They're trying to get through Blair Mountain and get all the way to Mingo County. But this is where the battle is going to take place. And what they try to do, they're really well organized. The miners are. You see, the newspapers, of course, that's the only medium we have right now. I always tell my students there were these things called newspapers back in the day, right? They don't know what those are. But anyway, so you got these newspapers, and they're all covering. This was headlines all around the world. It was in the London Times, from the Paris Tribune. The 10,000 plus miners armed themselves, and a lot of them were black too. Maybe as many as 20% were black, and this is a time when black people make up less than 10% of the population, and it's a real conspicuous time in history, for a lot of black guys to have guns and be willing to shoot at law enforcement officers,
Right.
So that's kind of a big deal too. But anyway.
So many sidebars.
Yeah, I know. So the media is portraying these army. They call them the Redneck Army because they all have red bandanas around their necks. And you can go back and look at some of the headlines, which are kind of funny now because of the stereotypes we have. And they things like Army of Rednecks, pillage countryside. So you kind of might have a different visual on that with today's stereotypes, right?
Yeah, slightly.
A whole bunch of Larry the Cable guys, coming out.
Whites up there tap dancing.
Yeah. Get her done was the password.
Yeah.
But my point is they were arguing that these were just a bunch of dumb hillbillies that were all on moonshine and they were all stirred up by these agitators and the problem with West Virginia was not that these people were living in really bad circumstances and just fighting for their basic constitutional rights. And by the way, this is Blair Mountain's one of the big reasons why the Second Amendment is such a big deal to West Virginians. We love our Second Amendment here in West Virginia because there was a time when we had to use it.
Right.
And so that story gets remembered. Hopefully that's something like that. We'll never have to use that again. But you have that Second Amendment there just in case the first one doesn't work out.
Right.
Quick question. Do you think they were well organized because a lot of them had recently served in World War I and were?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was getting to. There was a lot of veterans.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're good. No, that's the next logical question, right? We just finished World War I.
Right.
A lot of World War I veterans. Now, miners, by the way, were exempt from military service in World War I and World War II. You didn't have to go to war if you fought in the coal, if you worked in the coal mines, but a lot of miners did anyway.
To get out of the coal
mines. Because
to make real money.
Yeah. And I interviewed one guy. This is World War II guys, but World War II coal miners. But they were like, I thought I had a better chance of survival.
Wow.
That's
and it is true. This is a statistic. I've used this many, many times. But between 1880 and 1920, West Virginia coal miners had a higher death rate than the American military in World War I. Okay. So you had a better chance of going to France and coming back than you did working in a West Virginia coal mine. Anyway,
that's crazy.
A lot of them signed up and a lot of them served. And of course, some of that's too with patriotism. I mean, you have a lot of patriotic over here. So they come back and they take veterans and they put them in charge of squadrons. And then the veterans would try to get them into formation and then try to give them a little basic idea of what they would be up against once they made it to the front. And what they tried to do, so they went south and then they tried a pincer movement. And I don't know how well you guys know your military history, but a pincer movement's when you try to outflank, your enemy
Outflank,
on,
that's right.
on both sides, right?
Mm-hmm.
They tried this. Robert E. Lee tried this at Gettysburg. Didn't work. But he tried it.
He goes, didn't work.
Yeah. Well, he tried, but sometimes it works if you can outflank them on both. So they attack at the southern flank, which is at Blair Mountain, and then they try to hit the northern part of the place called Crooked Creek Gap. And so these were the two areas where they're trying to break through the most, and those were the two areas that had the most intense fighting. That's kind of what's called the Battle of Blair Mountain, even though the battle was much bigger than the actual mountain itself. And it's really, really rugged terrain. I've been up there many times. It's really steep, really rugged, really heavily forested. You can, if you go up there, and this is one of the reasons I think preserving that space is important. I think all battlefields are kind of sacred ground anyway.
Sure.
That's just kind of my take on it. It doesn't matter what the battle was about. If there was a place where people shed blood, it's something that should be preserved. And I don't think that's a political thing at all. I think that's just common sense.
Yeah, we don't need strip malls or housing complexes on those areas, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's lots of mountains. It doesn't have to be that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, but the reason I think preserving it's so important, if you're there, if you go up on Blair Mountain, as I have many times before, even by the way, I'm not supposed to. It's it's still coal company property, but I kind of make my way up there occasionally with a few other guys, and it's if you're standing up on top. Well, I've been on these little these entrenchments where they actually had the machine guns.
Right,
you look down the hill, and you think, what would it take to get somebody to charge up that hill, against machine guns? What would it take to get you as a civilian to do something like that? You have to feel like you're kind of pushed to the brink.
Right.
Yeah. And it really kind of magnifies the intensity of the struggle and what they were willing to risk. When I tell my students, it's not like they were on some kind of 21st century protest. You know what I mean? Where they all hold up signs and then take selfies of themselves and put it up on social media. So and everybody tells them how brave they are. It's not
negative,
that.
Right?
This is a whole different level of things that are happening. But anyway, so they fight it out. They're never ever able to really fully break the lines. They almost make a breakthrough at Crooked Creek in the north. They make a brief breakthrough, but then the coal companies kind of regroup and put it in. They also use some planes. Chafin has a couple of planes, and they try to bomb the miners with kind of these makeshift homemade bombs. And we have a replica
of that last week. Yeah. One of the classic one of them, like with the ugly looking pipe bomb looking thing. Yeah.
And they weren't very effective. But bombing wasn't effective anyway. I mean, bombing wasn't effective in the First World War. The militaries couldn't use it effectively because you just couldn't bomb with any kind of accuracy back then, much less a lot of bombs just didn't explode and things like that. Although a few bombs that they have at the Battle of Blair Mountain did explode. They bombed a schoolhouse, one-room schoolhouse where Bill Blizzard was kind of the general of the miners in the field. He was the guy in charge, on the field. Meanwhile, my great-grandfather was kind of talking to the media the whole time, being like, I don't know what they're doing. I've got nothing. He was kind of trying to play dumb when he was behind the scenes, and him and Blizzard and Fred Mooney planned the whole thing. But they were like, we don't know what they're doing. They're just,
Yeah, we hear some fireworks going off back there. But
So, there he is.
Now, which one? Now, who's this?
Frank Keeney is on the right.
Okay.
And Fred Mooney is on the left.
Okay.
And Fred Mooney was kind of like his number two guy. Both of those guys grew up as coal miners along Cabin Creek. And if you know your basketball history, You've heard of Zeke from Cabin Creek.
Mm.
You know,
Yep.
the NBA logo, Jerry West.
Yeah.
That's where he's from. That's where people know. And Randy Moss is from that area too. If you know
Okay.
your
Right.
sports.
Randy.
And Jason
Yeah.
Williams.
And Jason Williams. That's right.
Coach.
They're all from that same little area right there along Cabin Creek. So Mooney and Keeney both grew up along there. They were coal miners there, and they kind of took over the movement from Cabin Creek, and they kind of led that strike, and they won that strike. And so the Kanawha County miners in that county got organized, and then they became leaders in the union after that. But they were all pretty tough as nails. My great grandfather lived to be 88, and I don't know how, because he worked 20
That should
years.
be in a coal. Yeah.
And he drank like a fish too. He drank about a fifth of whiskey every day,
Woo.
and smoked too. Somehow lived to be 88 years old. But anyway,
See, boys, I'm just fine. I'm just fine. Get out of
I
here.
take back what I said about the smoking, bud. I take it back.
yeah. You guys got a healthy lifestyle going.
Light up another one, brother. Get you a fifth while you're at it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take it literally.
Yeah.
Oh.
But to the day he died, he carried around a Smith & Wesson with him.
Let's go.
Because he was always worried, even when he was an old man, like some Baldwin Felts guy would jump out of an alley and try to kill him.
It's my kind of people, right there.
Right.
Yeah.
They strap short.
Yeah.
We're actually, for sake of this show, we're going to have to split this up. So we're going to finish up the rest of the Battle of Matewan next Saturday. And so everybody stay tuned for next week. And we're going to keep hanging out here with Charles Keeney. So keep it locked in here on the Dude Network. We'll see you next Saturday. 3, 2,